C'est parti. Alors, bon matin, bonjour à tous. Merci de vous être connectés pour ce deuxième webinaire avec Tim Williams. On a la chance de l'avoir invité une deuxième fois. On a eu une première session à l'automne passé et les commentaires avaient été très positifs. Puis, de nombreuses questions parlaient surtout de comment on le met en vie dans l'agence. Donc, il ne faut pas que ça soit le travail d'une seule personne de penser à ce sujet-là. Et donc, avec Tim Williams, quand on lui a reparlé, il nous a suggéré ce webinaire de poursuite, donc numéro 2. Même si vous n'avez pas assisté au premier webinaire, il n'y a aucun problème. Donc, Tim Williams a ajusté son gens qui en sont à votre première participation sur le sujet. Alors, j'espère que vous pourrez en profiter, que ça vous fera réfléchir. Je sais que chaque agence se pose des questions sur ce sujet. Alors, selon où vous êtes rendu, je pense que ça va pouvoir vous amener plus loin. Vous allez pouvoir être influencé, inspiré, puis ensuite, bien évidemment, le partager à vos collègues pour le mettre en vie puis le rendre officiel, si on veut. Alors, bien évidemment, Tim Williams est un expert sur tout ce qui touche en fait le pricing and positioning strategy. Ça fait déjà plusieurs années qu'on collabore avec lui au niveau de l'A2C. Il est venu à Montréal plusieurs fois. So you've been to Montreal a couple of times and now it's just online. So we have the chance to have you for a second time for this year. So thank you very much for being with us today. And I'm glad that we can talk again about pricing value and transformation to life. That's the title for today. So Tim, that's your turn. Thank you very much.
Great. Bonjour. Good morning. I'm pleased to join you. I wish I were there in person in Montreal. It would be nice to be able to travel again, wouldn't it? I have today for you a topic that is going to help you build on what you saw if you attended the last one we did in the fall. It is how to actualize and implement the strategies that we talked about. If you didn't attend the prior webinar, that's okay. I'm going to review the key concepts as well, but this is meant to present a framework for how agencies can actually implement these new strategies, because that's always the question, isn't it? We think we should be working differently. We think we should be pricing differently. How exactly do we do that? What steps should we take? So that's what we're going to be talking about today. Just to set the stage, we're trying to break out of a vicious cycle as an industry where we have suboptimal pricing. In other words, we're still using old pricing methodologies and not earning the margins that we need. And therefore we can't afford it's more difficult to afford the very best people. And if we can't afford the best people, then we're not producing the best results for our clients. So that just keeps us trapped in a vicious cycle. And there's only one way to break out, and that's on the pricing question. We need to address the pricing methodology that we use so we can make better profits. Now, unfortunately, the pricing methodology that most of us use currently, and I know that there are some on the webinar today that have moved beyond this. I'm happy about that. But unfortunately, the majority of agencies still do this, right? We take the number of estimated hours on the assignment and we multiply that by our hourly rates. Well, actually, an economist would look at that and say, that's not pricing at all. That's simply costing. If we're taking hours and hourly rates, that's just a manifestation of our internal costs, has nothing to do with the discipline of pricing. So what we teach is that there's a big difference between these two areas, costing and pricing, and most agencies have not learned pricing. We only know costing. We know timesheets and cost accounting and time tracking and hourly rates and utilization and billable time, but not many of us have ever studied pricing. And if you've attended one of the prior webinars or workshops that we've done together, you're aware of this idea that there has been a global pricing revolution around the world, over the last 20 years, there's been an explosion of innovation and creativity in how most other businesses price. Now, unfortunately, that is much less true in professional services. We haven't been part of this pricing revolution, but obviously our mission is to help you become part of this revolution and adopt what are modern pricing practices. At the heart of what we're trying to do is move away from charging based on our cost of service. On this triangle, you can see three basic choices for how you charge for your services. You can charge for inputs, which is hours, time of staff, FTEs, staffing plans, and all its variations.
Tim, sorry to interrupt. Yeah. The slide didn't change, so did you change? Yeah, here we go.
Change now? Okay. So if you're charging based on your time and time of staff, that's charging based on the cost of your inputs. Well, again, an economist would look at that and say, that's not pricing. That's just costing. Pricing would be charging for either the perceived value of the actual work, the outputs, the work product itself, the deliverables, or charging based on the impact of the outcomes, the actual results in the marketplace. So our mission is to try and persuade you and agencies across the planet to stop pricing based on the cost of inputs and start pricing in either of these two ways. And there's a lot of creative ways that you can do that, which I'm going to be sharing with you. The unfortunate truth is that we have armies of people estimating, tracking, defending our costs, don't we? But who do we have inside our firms that is estimating, tracking, and defending our value? Well, in most agencies, that job doesn't exist. The answer is nobody is doing that. So our answer is this concept that we call the Value Council. Dominique, are the slides advancing okay? All right. So the Value Council is the way that you can bring these pricing strategies to life inside your agency, even inside small firms. This is not just for bigger agencies. This is for smaller independents. The idea is to take a small interdisciplinary group of senior executives inside your firm and appoint them to this Value Council. There are three main areas where there are very specific responsibilities. The first we call, and these are three different work streams. The first we call value creation. And this is about making sure that what your agency does looks valuable and feels valuable, that you're packaging it up in valuable ways. The second area we call value delivery. And this is about how we actually deliver that value to our clients, because it does require some operational changes. And then the third, very important, we call value capture. And this is largely the area of dealing with in new business and with prospective clients, procurement in particular. So by assembling this small group of people, and by small I mean 6 to 8 people at the very most, and not just finance and account service. We want creative directors, we want heads of media, we want strategists, we want the brain power of different disciplines inputting on the Value Council. So I'm going to walk you through in detail these three areas and show you lots of examples of how other agencies have done this. We've had the privilege of working with many agencies around the world and helping them establish and execute Value Councils, all the way from some of the largest agencies, the multinationals, with multiple offices, right down to smaller independents of 30 or 40 people or fewer. It doesn't matter the size. And we found this to be very successful because it helps your agency take this work seriously and not just say, yeah, we ought to do that someday, but actually make it someone's job, make it someone's responsibility. So let's look at each of these three areas one at a time. The first one, value creation. So you would have someone in your firm in charge of this. This is about 5 different areas. It's about recasting your services, the bullet point list of services you do, in a more valuable way so that clients see what you do as more valuable. It's about changing our language. And if you've been at a prior webinar, we've talked about this before. It's about implementing this concept we call the pricing stack. And this is trading the hourly rate for a variety of pricing methodologies. Related to that is diversifying your revenue streams. So instead of just one revenue stream, which are fees based on hours, we have lots of different ways we make money. And then finally, realizing that the work we do is of different value to our clients. So we need to separate the classes of value. So I'll walk you through each of these, starting with solution set. So if you look at any agency website at random, you're going to see a page that says something like services. You go to the About Us page, and then there's services, and we do this, we do advertising and graphic design and media planning and web development, and it goes on with this bullet point list of services. That is absolutely the wrong way to talk about what we do, and we would never do this for a client. For clients, we would take their services, their bullet point lists, and we would turn them into benefits, wouldn't we? We would take the feature and turn it into a benefit. We would say why this is important to their customer. So it's ironic that we haven't done this for ourselves. What we want to do is present our ability to solve important client problems, not just deliver services. Any agency can do that, but what kinds of big important problems do you solve for your clients? This is an example, Weber Shandwick, mostly PR, part of IPG. And this is their version of presenting and highlighting solutions we solve for X, and their entire new business approach is all around how we solve important problems for our clients. The framework that we provide to value councils, and by the way, you'll have access to all of these slides. I would encourage you to take notes as we go, but you'll have access to the slides, and you hopefully have the handout that Dominique provided, which goes through the content of the webinar kind of point by point. So that would be a good place to take some notes as well. But what we're trying to do here is on the left-hand column, think through as an agency, what are the main types of problems you solve for your clients? This is a very important question. And you're going to say, well, we solve lots of clients. That list is going to be, 40 or 50 points long. Well, that's fine. Start with a list of 50, but whittle it down, edit it, find the common threads, and you'll come up with somewhere between 10 or 12 main problems that you solve for your clients. And then you solve these problems by implementing these programs that generate these outputs. So we're starting with the important question first. And let me give you some examples. What are the main types of problems we solve for our clients? So these should be stated in first person from the client's point of view. Here are some examples. We need to retain our current customers and attract new ones as we launch a major new iteration of our brand. Here's another. We know there is untapped potential in our customer database, but we don't know how to unlock it. And we have a strong conversion rate, but need to substantially increase the number of qualified leads in order to meet our sales goals. So those are pretty specific types of client problems. So you would have similar examples. Here's that framework that I showed you just a moment ago with an actual example. To meet our sales goals, we need to generate more qualified leads, increase via our website. How do we do that? Well, through these programs, we have customer journey roadmap, business intelligence blueprint, real-time optimization that generate these outputs. So can you see how that's backwards from how most of us sell ourselves? We would list the outputs or the services, and that's all. So that's not showcasing what you do in a valuable enough way. Okay, the next section, I'm going to be covering lots of territory, I'll just warn you, is language. So here we want to replace the language of cost with the language of value in all client-related conversations and documentations. It's been said that all revolutions begin with language. Language is very powerful. The words we use, especially in commercial situations, are really important. And unfortunately, most agencies, we use the language of cost. Here's a partial list of bad words that we should not be using. We shouldn't be talking about cost and hours and rates and labor and time of staff. And, you can read the list: estimates, utilization. This is all the language of cost, and no professional seller would ever use this language. In place of the word cost, we should be using the word price. In place of talking about inputs, hours, labor, time of staff, we should be talking about the actual work itself and the problems it's going to solve on behalf of our clients. So we need to go through, if you're in this work stream in the Value Council, we want to go through every piece of written documentation that you have: proposals, plans, recommendations, scope documents. Anytime that you've got a document that uses any of this language of cost, we want to replace it with the language of value. So that's a fairly easy fix, hard habit to change personally, but you can do it. And the agencies that have undertaken this as an initiative have found it to be very powerful, just changing the language. So the pricing stack is this concept that we want to replace the concept of billing for time with a variety of different ways that we can price. And I talked about some of this in our last webinar, but if you didn't see it, I'll do a quick review. So these are examples of that may apply to your business model. Most of these probably would work for most of the agencies on the call today. Subscription-based is one of the most powerful. There is a global movement behind the idea that in the future, most products and services will be sold by subscription, things that you wouldn't suspect. Not just software, but you can subscribe to a BMW. You can subscribe to your refrigerator. I mean, everything is being turned into a subscription model now, including professional services. And so there's some examples of things that you do currently that could be turned into a subscription, such as a data analytics report that you do for your clients. Rather than just billing for the time of the people that are doing that, you instead package this up as a program, you give it a name, and you offer it to your clients via subscription. You can do the same with social media, community management programs. There are a lot of things that you already do that qualify, that could be packaged up and sold as a subscription. Usage-based means that you've got some IP, some digital platforms that you've developed, or some unique forms of intellectual property that could be licensed to your clients. And I'm going to show you more examples of that later on. Dynamic pricing is the idea that your price changes based on changing external factors. So this is how airlines and hotels price: dynamic pricing. The price of a seat on an aircraft is different for everybody. And why is that? Well, it's because the airline is pricing the customer. They're not pricing the seat. They're pricing based on different external factors. So here's an example from a British agency for a CRM program. As the time to implement the program decreases, the price increases, form of dynamic pricing. Outcome-based, this is the idea that you're going to agree to be paid based on outcomes of some kind. And this is an actual example from an agency in the Midwest here in the US that was working for a major university. They identified 5 different key metrics that they would benchmark and measure, and then their compensation would be tied to their ability to improve those metrics. Output-based is actually quite simple. this is just the idea that instead of charging for inputs, hours, you're going to charge for the work itself, the actual deliverable. So you're pricing the deliverable, not the hour, not the person. And there's a strong movement among brands like Unilever and P&G and Nestle and Microsoft, and I mean a very long list of large marketers who are almost insisting on some form of unit-based pricing. It's a very strong trend in our business right now. So what you would want to do is think through, so down the left we have these different pricing methodologies, and then across this matrix we're listing your top 10 clients, current clients, and we're just trying to imagine which of these pricing methodologies might possibly work with our current client base. It will take some explanation and some persuasion, and it might take a year or two before we can do it, but what might work, what's possible, so that we can start to think about how we restructure some of our client agreements. I just want to remind you that you can submit questions as we go here. I'm going to stop at the end of each of these 3 sections and take your questions. So rather than just wait till the end and try and do all the Q&A, then we'll stop 3 different times to address any questions you have. So please go ahead and submit them if there's anything on your mind. So by pricing in different ways, we are by definition diversifying what we call our pricing portfolio. If all we do is bill based on time and people, that is a very uncreative, undiversified way of charging for what we do, and it is inherently low margin because we're always trying to manage to just this very narrow margin built into the hourly rate. Whereas if you adopt the attitude that we're going to price in lots of different ways, different pricing methodology for different clients, then you're going to have a much better year-end profit margin. This is what you do when you, in your personal savings programs, you know, you're all saving for retirement. Are you putting all your money in one thing, just one thing? And of course not. You're diversifying in terms of how you're saving. And so the same principle applies in our pricing structure, in our pricing portfolio. Let me give you an example. So here are 5 different clients down the left-hand side. Agency A is going to take a uniform pricing approach, meaning they're going to bill for inputs, hours, time of staff in some way. Agency B is going to implement a different methodology for each of these clients. So let's look at Agency B. For the luxury automotive brand, they have an agreement to earn $50 for every car sold. For the mobile phone accessory brand, they're taking a royalty on sales. For the retail store brand, they're charging a fixed price for fixed scope. That's pretty straightforward. For the cosmetics brand, they're charging licensing fees for a series of web videos that they produce that are actually owned by the agency. And for the financial services brand, they are using an outcome-based pricing structure based on success metrics. These are all actual examples from the real world. These are actual agencies using these actual pricing methodologies on these types of brands. So it is being done. Which of these 2 agencies do you think is going to be more profitable at the end of the year? It's definitely the one with the diversified portfolio. The agencies that are earning the best profits around the world are definitely the ones that have the most diversified pricing portfolios. So here's just a few other ways to think about how you kind of can mix it up in terms of risk and reward. This actually is a Toronto agency we worked with some years ago, and they developed this model when they were doing their value council work, showing, as you can see, payout, meaning from short to long, and risk and reward. So that was kind of how they thought through. So they wanted a little bit of all of this as a way of mixing up their remuneration strategy. Here's yet another model where you got payout and again, risk and reward. So you want a little bit of all of this. You don't want to put You don't want to have just one way that you get paid. Okay. So the next thing related to pricing diversification is, if you're on the Value Council, recommend specific ways that you can start to mix it up. This is an agency Value Council that did an analysis, and they determined that currently 98% of their revenue was tied to labor-based fees. They're being honest, right? Yeah, almost everything. But their feeling was, as a team, that within 12 months, they could inject this level of diversity in their revenue streams. So this became their goal, so that a month later, they did have a much more creative way of approaching their compensation agreements. Okay, the last area in this work stream, and then we will stop for questions, is value classes. And this is the idea that what we do as an agency, the services we provide, have different forms of value to our clients. I've spoken and written about this before in terms of magic and logic, garden and factory. You know, the magic piece is the high value ideation, problem solving, concept development, strategy development. And the logic is the production implementation work that has a different value. But let me suggest a framework that I quite like for categorizing the value of what you do. So this is the very highest value. It's upstream. I call it solve. It's the things we do that help solve client problems. So this is strategy and ideation, concept development, etc. Then there's kind of a midstream class of service that we provide. I call this drive, and this is project management, client service, resource management, you know, the glue that holds everything together, including the downstream work. So downstream is the production, execution, implementation. So solve, drive, build, kind of three different classes of value that we provide for our clients. And so why is this distinction important? Well, here's a model from Boston Consulting Group that says, you know, the solve piece, the very high value work that they call the short tail. So this is you've heard of the concept of the long tail. In the short tail are these very high value things that you do. That ought to be priced at a premium. You're doing things that not every other agency can do. The things that are in the kind of midpoint, the long tail, those must be strategically priced, because, you know, other agencies may offer this, but you want to offer it in a slightly better way and make sure that you've priced it well. The things that are in the very long tail, things that are so widely available and so commoditized, and there's such price pressure, you ought to either stop doing them altogether or just decide that you're going to find a very cost-effective way to do them, because we cannot try and make our profits from the work in the long tail, but many agencies do. We try to make our money from the production execution piece, and we give away the ideation strategy piece. That happens all the time. I'm sure you agree with that. So for the build work, for the things in the very long tail, the what I'm calling logic factory work, what we want to do there is develop unit-based pricing, so that we're not arguing with our clients over the price for resizing a banner ad. American Express has published a unit-based pricing guidelines that they use with their agencies, and their price for resizing a banner ad is $438 US. So that's on the list. So things that are just, you know, you shouldn't argue about, shouldn't fall over on your sword for, just, you know, common production kinds of activities. Just assign it a unit price. Don't try and make your margins there, because clients will hold your feet to the fire. Make your money on the short tail, on the high value, on the magic piece. So the first step is just sit down as a team and think through, well, what is solve, what is drive, what's build in our firm for us. So we'll stop and take our first Q&A session before we move on to the next session.
There's only one question at this time, and it's from Jean-Philippe. So what are your thoughts on administrative time costs to support a very diversified portfolio and pricing structure?
You know, that's a pretty good question. I haven't stopped to think too deliberately about that. Are there additional administrative costs in that? Yeah, I would admit there probably are. But they certainly are going to pay off in the higher margins that you have. The way to think about it is, you know, inside your client organizations, they have finance and pricing as two separate functions. They have a chief financial officer and they have a chief pricing officer. And these are two different staffs and they do two different things. We don't have that in professional services. We only have the cost side. We only have the financial management side. What we're teaching or preaching is this idea. We also in our firms need this pricing function that's staffed by its own professionals. So some agencies actually do now have a chief pricing officer. So they don't do finance. There's a CFO, but there's also a CPO. So they realize that this is a extra, you know, an additional cost, but it's it pays for itself and many times over.
There's a follow-up questions, and there were another comment on the first question, but can you see this diversified model on 120 plus monthly recurring client agency, or only works with fewer client lists?
In other words, does it work with a long-term retainer type client? Is that the question? It's,
well, from my understanding is like, if you have more clients, if you have like probably smaller clients, so more clients, does it work, or should you apply it to fewer client lists with a bigger clients?
Sure.
And Jean-Philippe, if it's not right, just write another comment.
Sure, that's. I think I understand. You'll
pretty
expect,
much it.
Okay, you'll expect me to say this, but we eventually want to do this with every single client. But we've got to be realistic. It's going to take a while. So the attitude is one client at a time. You know, one opportunity at a time. Certainly with new clients, you can do it. With current clients, you can also make this transformation. You just look for windows of opportunity where you're sitting down and having a contract renewal discussion, and you introduce, you know, a few of these concepts, and over time you can convert even current clients. Our experience with most value councils is within 18 to 24 months, they've converted virtually every client they have to some form of this pricing stack that we're talking about.
From your experience, is it easier to begin with new clients or active clients?
Good question. I've changed my opinion about that over the years, because the obvious answer is new clients would be easier because you're selling in, you know, you're setting new expectations. But I've come to observe that sometimes it's just as easy with current clients. And it depends on the methodology, because like with an outcome-based agreement where you're getting paid for results, I would much rather do that with a current client than a new client, because current client, you know, you've got a high trust level, you know their business, you know their success metrics. New client, you don't have any of that. So I wouldn't do that with a new client. Whereas I would do subscription pricing with a new client. That's pretty risk-free. So kind of depends on the methodology.
There's another question. Budget-wise, how will it work with all the diversified methods? You need to quantify it all in dollars.
Can you say that again?
Budget-wise, because I read it about how will it work with all the diversified methods? You need to quantify it all in dollars. So probably more about the, like, if you base your remuneration on results, you don't know at the beginning how much you're gonna get.
Okay, sure.
Like it's just my.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. That's an excellent question.
So how do you budget that? Because you need to.
Well, it's you budget kind of like the way most of us budget now. None of us really know how much new business we're going to get in 2021, right? We don't know, but we've got to do a budget. We've got to do a forecast. So we take our best guess. It's the same with the diversified pricing portfolio. You really don't know how it's all going to play out in the end. So, but you're going to take your best guess, having the faith that it's going to pay off in the end. Some agencies have the attitude that we don't know where 30% of our revenue is going to come from. We know it will be there, but we're not sure which clients and which methodologies are going to pay off the most. But we have faith that they will pay off, and that's actually the attitude that you need to have. You're placing a series of small bets on yourself. Like you have the self-confidence that in the end, some are going to work really well, some are going to be marginal, and some will be outright failures. So what? You know, that's true of your personal savings portfolio. Some are star performers, some are average, and some you lost money. But overall, you did better than if you would have put all your money in one thing. Same principle.
So it's a comment that it's profitability per hour at the end.
We would stop looking at profits per hour. We wouldn't be using that as a measurement. We want to know, so the measurements we care about are revenue per employee, not profitability per hour.
And based on your experience from the agency who made the change, did they stop using the track of hours per employee? Eventually.
I'm not here to try and persuade you to stop doing timesheets right now, because that's too disruptive, and you wouldn't believe anything else I have to say. But most of the agencies who have value councils and who've been through this transformation, they virtually all at some point within a year or two realize, you know, time tracking and timesheets it's not helping us anymore. We're not using that like we used to. We don't really need it, and it's a big waste of time for us structurally and organizationally. So they do end up realizing they don't need them.
I have other questions, but because there's two other sections, I will probably wait after, because you will probably talk, because I'm quite curious about knowing how the clients react to that, because well, in Quebec, we have some implementation of pricing value, but really low. People are asking about blending rates, early hour rates. That's again really how the procurement are asking on the RFP. So I'm curious, but you will probably talk about that later.
And it's not unique to Quebec. I did a webinar in Brazil last week, and they said the exact same thing. And, you know, I did one in London the week before, and they said the exact same thing. And so it's not
good to know that we're not different.
This is what procurement does. That's just what they do. But section 3, we'll talk specifically about that.
Perfect.
Yeah. So the next section is is work stream 2. We call this value delivery. And the areas here are getting our organization to focus on what we call scope of value instead of just scope of work. We're looking at what are the metrics of success that we could use in the case where we do want to execute an outcome-based agreement. What should we be measuring? If what I'm saying is that measuring hours and time of staff is unimportant or less important, what should we be measuring? And then the pricing process. This is an important one. I'll describe it in just a minute. And importantly, how do we take this message to the rest of the agency? So we've got this small group, this value council. Part of their job is to then educate the rest of the agency so that they also know why we're making this change. So let's take these one at a time. The first is the outcomes focus. The idea here is that the clients come to us all the time with a predefined scope of work. You know, they say, here's what we need. We need you to do this. Would you like to submit an RFP? And there's an important question that should precede this, and you all know what it is. Okay, well, yes, you need these deliverables, but could we back up and have a discussion about what are we trying to accomplish here? So this is what we call a scope of value. Could we have a more in-depth, meaningful conversation about what we're trying to accomplish, the desired outcomes? Most agencies, you know, most good agency professionals would say, yeah, sure, we always ask about objectives, but I submit that most clients give a very incomplete answer, and that we don't have a very good understanding really of what the client success metrics are. So we preach this idea of what we call a success workshop, that every major client engagement should be preceded by a formal exploration of what are we trying to accomplish. So you can call it whatever you want, but it is in effect a success workshop. It's going through, sitting down with the key stakeholders in your client organization and defining what success is, not just sales, you know, because every client will say sales, but beyond sales, you know, what else and what predicts sales. So there are lots of interesting examples of this. You can call it an alignment workshop, but it's this idea of formalizing an exploration of what does success look like. Then, once you've developed your own version of this, test it, refine it with your clients. Here's a Boston agency with a value council that had some fun with they call it their outcomes workshop. And they use a lot of interesting account planning style techniques to do this. They have some fun. They sit down and have their clients write, you know, future headlines and vote with their wallet. I mean, actually put money up on a board to support the ideas or the objectives that they think is most important. So interesting way at getting at this question of what are we trying to accomplish. The second area in this work stream we call metrics of success, and this is the task here is to identify, based on your business model as an agency, what are the success metrics that you would be comfortable tying your compensation to. And by the way, let me just say, there are only certain circumstances in which you should propose an outcome-based agreement. It shouldn't be your most common method of pricing. But occasionally there's a client that's perfect for it. And that's where you want to be ready to say, okay, we're going to have a conversation with this client about being paid for results. How are we going to present this to them? What's our framework? So here are a couple. This organizes success metrics into 3 different areas: transactional, behavioral, attitudinal. So you would have a discussion with your client and say, you know, which of these metrics are important to you based on your past experience. And then you'd have a conversation about perhaps we could construct an outcome-based agreement. Here's another one, 5 different ways to categorize them: business-related, marketing-related, customer, channel, internal. Here's yet another with just 3, company, customer, channel. Here's an actual example from a value council that we worked with just a few months ago, that this is their custom model. So the 4 areas they have are, if you can read this: build brand, generate leads, convert leads into sales, increase customer loyalty, are the 4 broad areas. And within those, here are the metrics that for the right client, under the right circumstances, we might be willing to tie our compensation to. So you need to think through this in advance for the time where you do have a client where this might make sense, or a prospect. And then if you're assigned to this work stream, obviously you would be tasked with helping to construct and execute outcome-based agreements when the right client comes along. And what do I mean by the right kind of client? Here's the list. High trust level. Do they have the focus and patience to execute this kind of agreement? Do they understand their brand success drivers? Will they involve senior client? You can't do this with procurement, and you cannot do this with junior brand managers. You have to have the involvement of, CMO or that kind of level. And is this organization serious about accountability? So some clients, and very often it will be a current client that you've worked with for a few years, you look at that list and say, yeah, this client would qualify. A lot wouldn't. So just be prepared for the right opportunity. Okay, then internally, what should we be measuring in our organization? What should we be tracking? If we're not going to be obsessing about hours and tracking hours and estimating hours, then how do we manage our work? How do we forecast resources? And the answer is that we've got to move away from this idea that scope equals hours. These are some screen grabs from a conference I attended a few years ago where a large organization, I can't remember who it was maybe Nestle, they got up and made this presentation about scope management. And I thought it looked interesting, but underneath it all is it's all hours. They're just tracking hours, and that's not what scope is. If you look up a definition of scope, if you go to the Project Management Institute, which is an organization in Virginia, here's their definition of scope. It's objectives and constraints and risks and project structure and definitions and deliverables, and nowhere do you see hours, right? Scope is, are we doing what we promised when we promised? That's scope, and that's scope management. It has nothing to do with hours. Because you can all think of examples where a project has used 80% of its hours and it's only at 20% of completion, right? This happens all the time. So which of those two sets of information is actually useful? The 80%, we've used 80% of our hours, or we're only 20% complete? Which is the most useful set of information? It's the percent of completion. The percent of hours used means nothing. It means nothing. The only thing that counts is what's the progress and the milestones and the deadlines, because you've already priced the project and you're off and running. So this portfolio is about redefining scope as work delivered instead of hours worked. So what needs to change inside your agency in terms of the way you work and manage projects to help accomplish that? An important aspect of this is, if we're going to stop tracking hours, which I do want you to do eventually, what should we be tracking? Well, we should be tracking the cost and the price of the actual deliverables. So in our experience, just picking on some, brand review, you can see an example here, the second thing. On average, when we do a brand review, this is the price we normally charge based on, our 20 years of history as an agency. This is the norm. This is what we kind of normally charge. Now you can go back and look at that and say, well, there's some unique factors here, but to develop a database of the pricing for your common outputs is very useful. You don't have to step back and start from scratch every time and estimate hours. There's a lot of interesting methodologies for doing this. You may have heard of the t-shirt sizing system, which is actually used by some very large agencies, where they will sit down and instead of estimating hours, they will use t-shirt sizes. They'll say, well, is this strategy an extra large or a medium or a small? Is this creative concepting? What is that? What size is that? And what size is the production? And it's a really interesting way of changing the conversation internally, because you know historically what, on average, what a large strategy, what the cost of an impact of a large strategy is inside your agency. So you don't need to, as I say, start from scratch and estimate hours and walk around and talk to your colleagues. You kind of know what do we invest in a large strategy typically. So this becomes a shortcut for pricing. And when you have that, you can then create a process for matching resources to the outputs rather than using time tracking as a means of resource management inside the agency. So I know I'm kind of oversimplifying a fairly important conversation here, but this is part of what needs to change. If we're going to price differently, we need to forecast and manage our resources differently internally. The next area here is relating to pricing process. And if you've attended a prior webinar, you've heard me talk about this. There's a big difference between the way agencies and other professional service firms, law firms, accounting firms, basically those of us that are trapped in the old hourly rate system, we use bottom-up costing. We start with the product or service, and we estimate the cost by estimating the hours, and then we turn that into the price, and then we hope that price has value to the customer. The rest of the business world, your clients and virtually everybody else on the planet that runs a business does it just backwards. They do top-down pricing. They start with the customer, and they say, or the client, what's the potential value of what we're about to do for this client? Therefore, what should the target price be? Now let's look at our costs to make sure we can make a margin. Okay, now let's decide, let's build it. This is how your clients price all of their products and services, whether it's a product business or a service business. So again, this is a pretty big topic that we could spend 30 minutes on, but the idea is we want to educate our people internally that the old system where we just estimate our hours and hand it off to finance, and then here's our pricing to the client. That's the before. Our new approach is we're going to start with scope of value. We're going to have a good understanding of that. We're going to estimate the value. We're going to, in our minds, determine a target price. Then we're going to look at the scope of work and estimate the cost. So that's pretty different, isn't it? That's, we do entire webinars just around this one slide. So I'm giving it to you in a condensed version. And even then we're not finished. We then want to present pricing options, which I'll talk about in a minute. But if, here's an example of a value council that they brought this to life in this interesting visual way. And they used it as a way to teach the rest of the agency, here's how we used to do it. We used to do cost-based pricing, where we started with the cost and did the bottom up. Here's where we're headed now. We're doing value-based pricing where it's top down. So we do this and then this and then this. So it's a process where you're teaching all the people on the front lines of client business. We're doing it differently now. It's not like it was. It's a big change in how we think and how we work. Internal adoption is the piece about educating your colleagues inside the entire firm. And what value councils do here is they develop pricing FAQs, common questions that you're going to get from your staff. You can predict what some of them are. Does this mean every single client's going to be priced based on results? No. Does this mean we're killing timesheets next Monday? No. You have prepared answers to what are going to be common questions. We've seen some agencies develop, these interesting internal tools and, examples. Like on the right, this is a firm actually in Ireland that did about language, stop using this language and start using this, don't do this, but do this. So just as a way of getting the word out, and it's some put up posters internally. I mean, it's an internal campaign to say, hey, things are changing in terms of how we are going to capture value from our clients, right? And it's good for everybody. So you'll then want to identify opportunities to showcase the work that you're doing, share success stories. Some value councils have named themselves. This is, using the name intelligent pricing. So they've kind of branded their new approach to pricing. And then think about how you can incorporate this new approach to remuneration into your ongoing training program, professional development. I mean, this is a challenging area for most agencies. We struggle with training programs, but to the extent that you can schedule a little training, offer some webinars, provide some materials, it's going to help your key people get up to speed with what you're trying to do. Okay, let's pause again and see what questions you might have related to that section or anything.
Well, there are 2 questions actually. So first one, what about clients who doesn't have that much metrics or understanding of their own KPIs? Mm-hmm. How can you leverage something they don't understand themselves?
Boy, I sure agree with that. Well, in fact, I think that, I mean, you guys tell me, I think most clients don't have a very good understanding of their success metrics. They just don't. And the ones that I've talked to, they admit it. They say, yeah, you're right. You're asking us some very good questions, and we actually don't know. We should know, but we don't. And so that's why when you say, great, that's understandable. So could we walk you through our success workshop? Because that's going to help you, and it's going to help us. It's certainly going to help us, but it will help you also, your organization, clarify what your goals and success metrics are. So most clients find it of great value. So I would say, in response to the question, I think most clients don't have a good handle on it. And you certainly, for a client that really, for a very small client that really doesn't understand their metrics, you certainly wouldn't want to propose an outcome-based agreement with them. You want a client that at least has the data. They might not have thought through it very carefully, but as I said just a moment ago, my experience is most clients appreciate this. They appreciate you asking, and they take it as a good sign. They're not bothered by it. It's like, yeah, that's a good question. We really should talk about that.
Okay, and how can you charge per performance or revenue stream if you can't bank on their KPIs? Outcome-based agreements?
Well, in other words, is the question, can you trust their data and their KPIs? Is that what's being asked?
Sort of.
Well, if that's the question, and I hear this a lot, I mean, I think most of you would say that your clients are usually reluctant to share information with you.
Yep.
And they'll cite all sorts of privacy issues and data security, and I mean, none of which are the real reasons. They're protective of their data because they don't want it out there if it doesn't have to be out there. But if what you're proposing is a true outcome-based arrangement where if they win, you win, if they're successful, you're successful, those clients then start to see the reason why they do need to share the data, and they will, and they will. That's where you have to have a high trust level. You're going to sign a non-disclosure agreement where you could be seriously sued if you ever did disclose any of this data, right? So you're protected legally with your client, but you have to have a client who is willing to share the data with you, but you need to give them a reason why. We haven't given them a good reason why but to propose an outcome-based agreement, you've just given them a very strong reason why they should, or they need to.
Is there a CRM system whereby your process can be integrated? That was one of my questions, a recommendation of software or a CRM system.
Yeah, boy, I wish somebody developed it, and they could make a lot of money. There are bits and pieces of software that will help. For example, most enterprise ERP systems that agencies use don't do what I'm talking about. They're still time-based, right?
Yeah.
But there's some systems out there like Scope. It's a software product from out of the UK that is looking at helping you price your outputs instead of your inputs. It looks at the average cost and average price for outputs. So it's not a full-blown software accounting system. It doesn't do your billing and general ledger and all that, but it will help you on the resource allocation and project management piece. So that's a very good question. Honestly, many agencies have built their own. I mean, who've been serious about this. They've said, well, it kind of doesn't exist. There's no commonly available solution, so we're going to build one. And there are half a dozen agencies that we work with that have done that, built their own.
There's an opportunity to sell that.
Yeah,
or have a subscription.
I agree. I definitely agree. So one of you should develop it and then offer it via subscription to your agency friends.
So there's no other questions about this section.
Okay. All right. Well, let's go on to the last section 3. This is really about the new business process. So this is important, and there are 5 areas here: the buying selling process, how to develop better proposals based on value, how to get in the habit of always offering options, which I'm going to cover. What do we need to do in terms of crafting agreements that aren't so one-sided, that also protect us, not just our clients? And then finally, could we develop some brand new revenue streams, that things that would be completely new sources of revenue? So let's look at each of these. Just as a backdrop for this section, we need to keep in mind that in every new business situation, there are actually 3 different buyers that we're dealing with, 3 different types of buyers. We're dealing with the economic buyer. This is the person with the budget to hire you. And this is generally the chief marketing officer or the equivalent, right? The CMO. There is the user buyer. This is the person that we will end up actually dealing with on a day-to-day basis, or the people that we interface with. And then there's the technical buyer. And who is that? Well, that's procurement. And the job of the technical buyer is not to decide whether or not to hire you. That's not their job. They don't have that ability. That's only the economic buyer. There's one person of these 3 that can make that decision, and it's not procurement. Although they would like you to believe that that's their decision, they masquerade as the economic buyer. They want you to believe that they have more power than they do. They don't. And we get sucked into all sorts of things that we shouldn't do and really don't need to do, because we believe what the technical buyer tells us. We believe what procurement tells us. And much of what they tell us is simply a bluff. It's a card game. One of the best books written on the subject of dealing with procurement is Reed Holden's Negotiating with Backbone. And the central theme of this book is this: instead of just reacting to what you see and hear during a negotiation, first analyze it from being in the standpoint of being in a game. You're not supposed to take all of it seriously. But unfortunately, we in agencies, we do tend to take it all seriously. They tell us, gee, we really like you, and we're thinking that we might want to hire you, but you're going to have to reduce your fees by at least 5% for us to be able to do that. And so we'll need to hear back from you by the end of tomorrow. Reduce your fees by 5% and you've got the business. So do you have to reduce your fees to get the business? What do you think? No, you do not have to reduce your fees. You already won. This is a last-ditch effort by professional buyers to twist your arm a little bit and just get a little bit more out of you. or, you know, you're the most expensive agency we're talking to. You know, there are 3 finalists. You guys are the most expensive. Well, guess what they're telling the other 2? Same exact thing. This is the procurement game. And we're very susceptible to it because we haven't studied what procurement people do. So their tactics work pretty well on us. They withhold information. They won't allow contact with the real decision makers. They're not very clear about the scope, undefined budgets, and, you know, benchmarking us against other firms, saying, well, you're $5 more per hour than this other firm. I mean, these are all in the bag of tricks that professional buyers use on us all the time. So in a lot of webinars and workshops we do, if I could see you all on camera, I would ask, you know, how many of you have ever read a book about procurement? I don't think I would see a single hand go up, right? So we haven't studied their game. We don't know their game. They know us and our game, that we don't know their game because we haven't studied it. So that's what this section is about. Fight fire with fire. Not everything they tell us is true. In fact, the people that teach dealing with procurement for a living will tell you that you should be suspect of everything procurement tells you, right? Just assume that it's not true. Rather than assuming that it is true, assume that it's not true is a much better framework. So we want to champion an approach that actually pushes back on the procurement process. And I'm here to try and persuade you that rather than hurting you, which is our natural reaction to this, that we think, okay, well, you know, then we're gonna lose a lot of opportunities and we're not going to win as many, you know, pieces of business. I'm here to persuade you that the opposite is true. That if you will push back a little bit and reply with the answers to the questions that they should have asked, not the questions that they did ask, that actually helps you stand out and helps you advance and win. So when you're given this spreadsheet, I know you can't possibly read this, but it probably looks familiar. Like, okay, first step in the process, just fill in your hourly rates and your people, and the formulas are already built in here, and just submit that. You know, that's the first step. So what should we do when you're asked to do this? We should say no, politely, and not just no, but yes, no, yes. This is the Harvard Business School negotiation program based on the work of Bill Urey, this book, Power of a Positive No. It's this idea that, you know, we're asked to fill out the hourly rate spreadsheet. So we first want to say, yes, we understand why you're asking for this. Lots of agencies work this way, and this is part of the process you've developed. So we understand why you're asking for it. And here comes our no, but that's not how our firm defines and sells value. And then we follow that up with a yes. So here's what we think would work better for both parties. And we come back with something like, we approach compensation differently from other agencies because we don't sell time. We sell intellectual capital and business results. In fact, we believe the traditional ways agencies charge works against the best interests of both the agency and the client. Hours and timesheets are focused on efficiency, and we don't believe you're buying efficiency, you're buying marketplace effectiveness. Because we don't bill by the hour, we don't have hourly rates. Rates, staffing plans, and FTEs are all focused on inputs, and we're in the business of outputs and outcomes. So that's one of many real examples that value councils will come back to in an RFP process to say, we work differently. And the reaction of most of the kinds of clients that you actually want to work with is, wow, that's interesting. What do you mean? Tell me more. It opens the door to the right kind of conversation rather than this race to the bottom with, well, your hourly rates are higher than the other agency. You know, that's the wrong conversation. So we want to, this is called, and you maybe heard about this book, it's called The Challenger Sale. It's this idea that we want to instill in especially in our new business team, this idea that our job is not to act as the relationship builder. This sounds like this is the way we should be, but you know, the relationship builder is gets along, likable, genuine, gets right back. You know, what do you need? You know, how high do you want me to jump? That's the relationship builder. The challenger politely pushes back and offers a different perspective, is trying to present a better way to hire agencies and evaluate who's best for your business. And it turns out that the challenger, based on the research that's been done for many years, is 13 times more effective than the relationship builder. You will win more than 10 times more often by adopting the challenger approach versus the relationship builder. It's counterintuitive, isn't it? Because we kind of expect, well, the nice person, they're going to win. It's just the opposite. So it's not that we don't want to be nice. We always want to be nice. We always want to be polite, but we want to push back in a way that is going to help us stand out, and it becomes a competitive advantage. So this relates to proposals. When we're doing proposals, we don't ever want to come back with data and information that is just all about our costs. In fact, we want to have this attitude that of these three things, price, inputs, and outputs, our clients really only need to know the price and the outputs. They don't need to know our costs. Our clients, our costs, our internal costs, our staffing, our cost of staffing, our cost of overhead, all of those things that clients often ask us about, it's none of their business. It's none of their business. And part of the reason that we're having that conversation with them is because we trained them that they could ask us these questions, because we kept asking. And the more they ask, the more we give more, and they keep asking, and we keep giving, and they keep asking, and we keep giving. And we're now down this rabbit hole where we're having a discussion about how much you pay for rent and utilities rather than what they're getting for their money. So we want to rewrite the remuneration sections of proposals based on what our clients are really buying, outputs and outcomes instead of inputs. So here's a real life example from a value council actually in Canada. I blanked out the names, of course, but you know, I won't read this, but it's basically describing, you know, the current system of hourly rates is wrong. It's not in your best interest. We work in a different way, and the proposal we'd like to give to you is going to be based on what you're actually buying from us, which are the deliverables and the results, not our time and efforts. In place of selling people or even services, we want to, and this goes back to the first work stream, not the bullet point list of services, but you know, here are the problems we can solve for you. Here are the programs that we have developed to help solve your problems. So we're selling in a more valuable way in our proposals. Okay, options. I mentioned this briefly. Your clients, all of your clients, I can say that with pretty, I think, pretty risk-free claim that they all offer options, all your clients. So you subscribe to software, book a hotel room, you know, select a cable plan, whatever, including in B2B, you know, your clients and pricing professionals, they always offer options. And why do they do that? Well, it's because it gives the customer, it gives the buyer context to know what choice they should make. It's not a yes or no. It's not a take it or leave it. It's not, here's our price, do you want it or not? It's a choice of prices. It's a choice of yeses. So we teach the idea that agencies should always offer options for everything. Anytime and every time you ever quote a price, give your client options. Here's option A, here's option B, here's option C. You get different things, different value, different price. Which one of these would work best for you? You can serve it up in many different forms. Here's, you know, bar charts. You can see option 1 is integrated messaging platform, option 2, proactive messaging platform. And outreach and option 3 is the full deal. It's full experience design and development. So this is a very powerful, of all the things I'm talking to you about today, this is one of the easiest that you can do starting this afternoon. Options and language, you can do those 2 things right away. Doesn't take any big overhaul of your agency structure. And it's very powerful. What we want to do is, for all the different kinds of projects that you do as an agency, develop kind of a template for options as a starting point. So we're going to do a communication strategy. We're going to develop an app. We're going to do a brand identity program. We're going to execute a media campaign. You know, for those classes of work, what's a good starting point for options, so that we don't have to sit down and just create them from scratch every time. And options can be presented in lots of different formats: written only, lines, iconography, you know, lots of different ways you can serve it up. But the way to think about developing options is to, you know, think through, you know, these are the 5 Ds that we normally go through on a project: discovery, definition, design, development, deployment. In option 1, what are we going to include or exclude? What are we going to either add or subtract in each of these areas in option 1? Then what about option 2? Then what about option 3? So we're giving our client a choice of what they're buying and a choice of prices. So which of these options gets selected more than 70% of the time? I bet you can guess. The middle option, followed by the most expensive option. The least expensive option is selected the least amount of time, which is also a little counterintuitive, isn't it? Okay, agreements. So this is the idea that we want to do a better job of protecting ourselves in client contracts. So master service agreements. If you're working in this area on the Value Council, you want to step back and say, okay, well, what are the areas where we've actually given away too much, that we agreed to too much? We agreed to unreasonable terms that really is not in our best interest. The Value Councils that have done this have gone through past agreements and identified a lot of areas where, no, we really shouldn't have agreed to this, and this gives away too much, and our client is asking us to act like a bank. You know, they want to pay us in 120 days, or they want us to be an insurance company by, you know, indemnifying them against every form of liability. So identify what those are, and then begin testing, pushing back on these in future agreements, so that you can keep more of what's rightfully yours. And again, this is a matter of test and learn, but an important part of this work stream. Okay, last one, and then we'll take our questions at the end that can be about any of the sections. This is an opportunity also to decide that maybe there's some new revenue streams that we could create. And the framework to think about here is, so this is scalability on one axis and profitability on the other. If you take most of what we do, which is services, labor-based services, that is it's low margin, because it's got just, you know, a tiny margin that we attempt to build in, and it's impossible to scale. You can't scale it. The only way to scale labor-based services is to add more people. And that's not scaling. That's not what scaling is. By taking these services and turning them into programs, like we talked about in the first section, solution sets, that's more scalable. And it's higher profit, because you're taking things that you know you can do, that you're confident you can deliver. You're giving them a name, you're attaching a price, you're offering options. So you've just moved up the profitability scale a bit. And then the ultimate is are there things that you do that could be productized? True money while you sleep. In other words, an analytics product or tool or a data platform or a social media reporting structure. There are things that you do that could be productized and sold that way, which is very scalable and much higher margin. So the idea here is, I'm going to skip that, to think through, what are our proprietary processes and techniques? What's our proprietary knowledge, our value enhancing practices, to just kind of look through what you've done in the past for clients and ideas that didn't get bought and things that you thought about that never went anywhere. Could we take some of those and actually get serious about turning them into a form of intellectual property that we could monetize? So then recommend which of those could be productized. This is an interesting way to make that judgment. So price potential on the vertical axis, and then differentiation on the horizontal axis. You'll end up, you want to do things that have high price potential that are quite unique, right? So that are in that upper right-hand quadrant. And then oversee the development of these and begin to test. And there's some really great success stories here. This is from Weber Shandwick, their product called Firebell. Well, it's a program / product. This is the crisis communications work they do for their clients, which they used to do by the hour and, the way most firms do. They instead decided to package it up as a program, gave it a name, kind of a great name, and they now license Firebell, which is crisis communications training, to their clients. Much better way to do it, and it's become an important ongoing revenue stream for them. Here's a healthcare specialist agency. They were doing medical education materials, like medical education movies and things like that for their pharmaceutical clients. And they decided, you know what, why don't we we'll do these at our expense and we'll own it, and then we'll license it back to our pharma clients. So that's become a really interesting revenue stream for them. There's an entire article in the Harvard Business Review titled "Putting Products into Services," which makes the argument that even in professional service firms like us, there's a lot of what we do that can be reimagined as products. So that's some good inspiration. Okay, so I've covered a lot today. I warned you. How do we get all of this done? There's 3 work streams. There are lots of initiatives in each of these that we've covered. Well, our answer to that, our practical answer, has been to turn this work into a series of sprints. So, the concept of a sprint, it's a predefined period of time with a start and a finish. So you take this work and you say, okay, sprint 1, we're going to do this, this, and this, and this. Then we're going to check that off. Sprint 2, we're going to take the next set of work. By the time you get to the end of sprint 3, you will have done everything we talked about during the last 90 minutes. And we've been through this process many times with many value councils, and it's a great way to organize the work. We would recommend that you use some kind of an online collaboration platform like, Basecamp or Microsoft Teams or, whatever you might use inside your organization to share assets and to collaborate and to get this work done. There's a way to measure your progress, kind of where are we now, where are we headed. As I say, you'll have access to this slide. You can take a look at that. So I know that this is maybe a little overwhelming, and there are a lot of questions going through your mind right now, and a lot of them are, I think, how questions, and I think that's understandable. How do you do it? How long will it take? How much will it cost? How do you get, okay, I agree, but how do I get other people to change? And how do you measure all these how questions? My best answer to these is the work of Peter Block in his book, The Answer to How is Yes. The answer to how is yes. So his main philosophy is that in business, most of our how questions are simply manifestations of resistance. Like, yeah, we can't do that because we're too small, or we're too big, or we're in a small city, or we're in a big city, or we've got right? We've got lots of reasons why we could never do this. He says, you know, the important thing is just to start, just to begin. That everything I've shared with you today is absolutely doable, because there are other firms that have done it. So let's take your last set of questions and we'll get you out of here in the next 3 minutes, hopefully.
There's one question, and it's a how. So that's a
fine.
good
How
ending
questions
question.
are just fine. Yeah.
So how do you know if the options are profitable or not? You still need to track how much time you spent on these options versus the price you charge. No.
I would say that if your firm has been in business more than 2 or 3 years, you know that without having to track hours. And certainly the agencies that have been in business 10 or 20 or 30 or 40 years, you already know the answers to those questions. You don't need hours to tell you, because you've done these types of assignments before. You've done a brand identity assignment before. You've done a social media campaign before. You've done it over and over and over. You don't need hours to tell you. You know on average what your internal costs are going to be. And that's the big point we make about, we should be obsessed with outputs, tracking, measuring outputs, not inputs, because the outputs answer those questions for us. So you'll just find that I know it's natural and normal to feel like, well, wait a minute, we need hours to tell us what our costs are. Well, yeah, if you're just starting a brand new agency and you have no history and you're just new to the business, yeah, maybe you would, but that's not true for anybody on this call today. Most of you have a sense already for that.
Well, we have a comment, loved it. So that's
Great.
a good ending comment. There's no other question. You mostly respond to the question that I had like during the webinar. There is a lot of question about how to do it, but yeah, obviously they need to start and they need to think about it. Yeah. And I don't know if there's any other question. I don't see any. So that's the time to write your question if you have some. We have a good list of, like, I just took the name of the books, but I have 5 new books to read. Yeah. So that's a good starting point, at least. Yeah.
I always give you a reading list. Yeah.
Well, that's good. Thanks, Tim. I've started implementing option and find it a game changer.
Oh, wow. Great. Great. I'm really glad to hear that. Yeah. Yeah. So, options easy. I mean, just do that. Of all the things we've talked about, just start with that and you'll have the same experience. And then I hope you'll do the rest of this as well, but that's an easy place to start. These are all the ways to track me down and stay in touch. I do write a lot about these topics on our Propulsion newsletter. You're welcome to subscribe to that. And, you know, on our website, there's a fair amount of information as well. So thanks for inviting me.
There's 2 other comments, Tim, just before I let you go. So, and another agency says, starting 2 since last conference. So at least there's some movement around that. And there's a comment. In a way, clients are now obsessed with transparency. So going to their procurement as a gatekeeper is a strong reflex. I'll be so happy to say no politely, no to a template, but if everyone else is doing, if everybody else is doing it, is there a risk? No, it's just the opposite. And you'll just have to trust me on that. I mean, will you ever get kicked out because you didn't comply? Sure, it's possible, but the experience of most value counsels is the exact opposite. They go on, they don't get kicked out as threatened, and they go on to win the business because it differentiates you. Instead of just being one of, 7 other agencies that do exactly what they were asked, you're the one that didn't. And that helps you stand out in a good way. You'll have that experience as you do a little more test and learn. Well, I would be very curious if somebody is testing it. I will do. So Alain, keep me posted about that, and we can relate to the next conference about the experiences. Yep, good. I'd like to hear too. Perfect. Julie is doing it as well. So that's good. So then we need to invite you again, and then we can share experiences about how they implemented it and what are the experiences lived.
Perfect. I'd love that. You know, I'd love to have a session where some of the members share their practical experience with the rest of the.
But I think we would be ready after 2 webinars on the subject. That would be good to have at least a meeting. That would be great. So that we can share experiences and then learn about the experiences for our market as well. So
yeah,
that would be
I'd be pleased to do that with you. Yeah.
It's a rendezvous.
Okay, you got it.
Perfect. Well, thank you again, Tim.
Okay.
It's always a pleasure. And if you have other questions, you know how to reach Tim directly. Merci de votre temps, et j'espère vraiment que ça va vous aider, influencer, inspirer. Puis tenez-moi au courant des développements. Ça va vraiment m'intéresser pour la suite des choses. Merci beaucoup. Thank you again, Tim.
Okay.
Always a pleasure.
Bye-bye.